When you dare to share, you break the silence. When you dare to share, you speak your truth. When you dare to share, you use the full strength of your voice. When you dare to share, it brings opportunity to own your story. So tell it, be heard, and at the same time, your sharing is someone else's learning, inspiration, motivation, empowerment, and hope. There's always an element to each of our stories that remains a secret. For some, we feel it's a dirty little secret. Dare to share your untold story exposes these secrets in a welcoming and positive way. I encourage each of you out there to dare yourself to share what is yours to tell. When we dare, it is the courage to do something really important. Let this be a vow to each and every single one of us that we take risk, we brave, confront, and face what is, while inspiring and empowering all communities. So let's break that silence and tap into mental beauty. This is Salima Jadabji, your podcast host, a practicing social worker, and your mental wellness connoisseur. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast, episode number 65. The recovering perfectionist reveals herself, her truth, and her imperfections. To all my fellow listeners, before we get started, I'm just dropping in a note to give you a heads up that this podcast might be emotionally triggering for you. We do invite guests onto the show who share openly about extremely difficult life moments with exposure and impact of what the struggles have been like. The intensity of each episode could have a variable impact on your emotional and mental well-being based on your own personal story. If at any point the topic becomes uncomfortable or upsetting to you in any way, please do not pressure yourself to listen. Instead, be kind to yourself, do some self-care, and perhaps give another episode a try. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Dare to Heal's very own clinician, Stephanie Hanley, as our guest on the show. However, today is going to go down a little differently. Today, Stephanie will be the one asking all of the questions, and I am going to be placed in the hot seat, ready to unveil even more than I have previously. So let me start by giving Stephanie the proper introduction that she deserves. Stephanie Hanley is one of Dare to Heal's very own clinicians supporting tweens, teens, and young adults who are going through trying times. She has a deep understanding that it can be a challenging time for people who are seeking supports on all fronts, whether it is a young individual working through the process of academic or behavior-related issues, healthy socialization, instances of bullying, as well as those who are in need of emotional support for both professional and personal development. Stephanie does incredible work to support and help navigate today's emerging youth and young adults work through pressures around family, society, peers, and help them in their transformation by guiding them to identify emotions, harness resiliency, and recover their strengths. Hello, Stephanie. Welcome to the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast. Thank you so much for coming onto the show as an interviewer.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Amazing. It's really neat to have you on the show today. And while I will be the one on the hot seat, I am grateful that you have taken time out of your schedule to continue to support the podcast and its endeavors. Your willingness to be here to support me today means a great deal. So, Steph, so far I have been incredibly blessed with each and every guest that has come onto the show, and they've shown up with true authenticity and pure vulnerability. They have taken a stance with me to help me break barriers of mental stigma. And now I have landed this opportunity with you for both of us to journey even further on my quest to getting those barriers knocked away one by one and breaking the cycle and pattern of mental stigma in our society and community. It is so imperative that we take a stance together to help break barriers of mental stigma.
I love the work that we've been doing together to try and break those stigmas. And I can't believe how far we've come from starting just 2 years ago. I think it's an incredible journey we've been on.
Yeah, absolutely. And Steph, I know that you're really well aware of what this podcast is all about. And just to reiterate, it's all about bringing forward untold stories that people go through, whether directly about a mental health struggle or something else. And we know that no matter what the story, there is impact on one's own mental health in some way, which remains unseen or tucked away. And so this platform, it serves in a way to break the barriers of mental stigma that have been conditioned in our society. So today, together, my hopeful mission is that both of us will continue to encourage people to share and tell what individuals typically have reservation to express. And of course, I continue bringing forward a trend called the mental beauty rethink. Steph, even though we are in regular contact and in constant communication, I'm not sure that I've ever slowed down enough to ask you this. I really want to ask you, what comes to mind first? What comes to your mind first when you hear the phrase the mental beauty rethink?
To me, mental beauty involves embracing the array of emotions one can experience in a lifetime, and really honoring those feelings for what they are. Recognizing that all feelings are valid and that they exist for a reason, whether that's to heal us, to protect us, or to teach us. And that experiencing these emotions can ultimately help you to understand, cope, and heal. And I think mental beauty is really another word for resiliency, the ability for someone to adapt, to handle the twists and turns of life and come out on the other side, however that looks for that person.
Wow, that is so amazing. Very, very thought provoking sharings. I really appreciate that you shared all of that. It's a really important reflection that you make, and so many important points to take in. Very refreshing. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, Steph, it's time. This is where you start becoming the question asking boss. I hope that you're ready to take the lead. I'm getting a little nervous over here. Not sure what you have in store for me. Yet I am willing to sit in the discomfort and see what emerges.
Okay, well, let's get it started.
Hmm.
Maybe we can tell the listeners of the show what inspired you to come on for a second time to share on this podcast.
Hmm. Yeah, thank you for asking me, Stephanie. I can't believe I forgot to mention this. I mean, I know you kind of gave a little sneak peek by mentioning the 2 year anniversary of this podcast. And actually, this week is the 2 year mark for this podcast. And that's right. 2 years ago, on this very week, was the birth and launch of Dare to Share Your Untold Story. And I'm amazed to see such growth in the show. And I'm really proud for people to have been able to like tap into their courage and bravery to come forward and share individual stories.
I cannot believe it's been 2 years.
I know, 2 years.
Two,
Episode 65.
I cannot believe it.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
And in addition to that, something on a more personal note, something else that's really important to note really is that on January 25th, a number of years ago, I lost someone incredible in my life, a role model, a confidant, an individual who gave so much of themselves to the community, family, and someone I genuinely admired and looked up to and just adored very much. And this is someone who helped me learn to believe in myself no matter what the stakes were, naturally was a pillar of strength for me, and helped me feel so empowered in life. So it's a tribute from me to them, taking the step, the next risk, not just taking a step, but the next step, the next risk, and exposing my truths a little more. What I have learned over time is that the more we share, the more we uncover. And that means there is even more to share. So I have more to share today about my untold story. As the layers are uncovered and I'm able to reflect even deeper, more insight has surfaced, and I'm able to put enough of the pieces together to share after making sense of it myself. And I now hope to inspire others a little more, or at the very least, encourage others a little more to do the same. So, I guess basically, to sum it up in terms of what's inspired me to come on a second time, is that it's the 2 year anniversary of the podcast. It's a tribute to a very dear heart connection that I lost, who's been inspirational in my life. And I have more sharing to do. And I guess just to add a little something, this 2 year mark is a reminder that I can do this. It can be done. The stories are coming. They will continue to come. The podcast will continue its journey forward in its mission to break down barriers of mental stigma.
Wow. So, okay, Salima, before you unravel the next parts of your untold story, give us the newspaper headline of how you would title your untold story. What would it read?
The podcast trademark question. Okay. So my headline, how would it read? She's not damaged goods. That's her old story. Now she breathes in the art of being perfectly imperfect.
Oh, I love that.
I need to let it simmer for a second. I'm going to just say it one more time. She's not damaged goods. That's her old story. Now she breathes in the art of being perfectly imperfect.
That is great. Can you say a little bit more about what this means, this title means to you?
Yeah, I'm going to tease you guys a little bit before we get into the details of it. Okay, so this really ties in for me with my initial telling of my original episode of the Miracle Baby and all the themes that emerged in my life as a result of having that pattern fueled in me for such a long time, the resulting of the perfectionism that ensued and all the parts of the process that I endured along the way. I know there's so much to unstitch here, so as you lead me, I will share.
Okay. Can you tell us what your untold story is all about?
Yeah, I sure can. Okay, so I am daring myself to share another round of all things personal. So, just to recap from the first episode when I shared, I touched on how I was easily influenced by the anxiety of my parents and others, and focusing on being a miracle baby, and then contending with an inner narrative that bounced from not feeling good enough to the need to be perfect. So, for this phase of my untold story, this is all about tapping in further with the perfectionism piece. It's not really about a particular time or place or particular people. It's just how things have manifested and how things have taken its shape and form. I have previously identified that I am a recovering perfectionist, and this is 100% the case. I am not having any deniability here. I do find that the more we are willing to explore, the more we can uncover, as I was saying before. So I am learning that while I may have done a great deal of healing, only when I slow down or even pause, take it in, reflect, and allow myself to take that process in, am I able to truly be the witness to my own experiences. Only after slowing down do I understand what has been healed, what is still healing, what I have learned, what I am still learning, and where I am and where I want to be. It's about underlying themes and narratives that have fueled the perfectionism, and much of it is in disguise mode. And so the more connections I have made, the more my life has made sense to me in terms of process, outcomes, desired outcomes, consequences, understanding mine and the behaviors of others.
Okay. So, seeing as you are like you said, a recovering perfectionist, can you
Yes.
tell us maybe how this perfectionism manifested? Where did it come from?
Yeah, let's get into that. So, for me, perfectionism manifested before I even had any awareness of it. I had a few running narratives that fueled the perfectionistic mindset. So, previously, I mentioned talking about my compromised health as damaged goods in the other episode, feeling really defective. So defective that I felt I had to hide this. And as I grew up, it became my dirty little secret. And I would desperately try to make up for it by seeing how perfect and great I could show up to the world, thinking that if I show up perfectly, then I will be seen or even worthy to be seen. I had this idea in my mind that because of health deficits, I wasn't worthy enough. But I also think it was more than just the health deficits. I think it's the health deficits that kept me from socializing in the same ways or being permitted to socialize in the same ways or many other things that unfolded. So I think part of me felt that the deficits were not just physical, that there were just all these things wrong with my entire makeup, right? So I
Mm.
had these constant reminders in my life. I was reminded constantly that I couldn't do things, whether it be overbearingly protective parents, all well and good intentioned, and family members, being protective as well, other family members. And I know they're just being scared for me to take regular life risks, or whether it be about knowing that I had to make careful choices to minimize certain symptoms from showing publicly. So all of this really put a damper on the way it felt for me, and it really became limiting. There were other limitations because I was a girl from a gender perspective, or I was the youngest of the siblings, and many times choices were actually being made for me.
Wow. It sounds like there's so much to unpack here.
Yeah.
A lot. Are you able to share anything around how you think this may have come to be? Like, was there anything particular that helped to manifest these perfectionistic tendencies within you?
Yeah. Like somewhere along the line, I got this idea or suggestion that manifested into perfectionistic ways. Not sure exactly if it's rooted in cultural norms, family dynamics, being the youngest in the family, or if it was a gender thing. Being a female, for me, I grew up mostly with boys, and noticing differential treatment occurred, or if it was even just because of having what felt like many complex health challenges. But I guess now in hindsight, it might have been the combination of all of it. I guess the more I'm verbalizing it, the more I'm kind of going, oh, this actually might all be a combo, right? So, this entire list that I mentioned here is what added the additional elements that anchored the perfectionistic tendencies to a whole new level. And then there were my parents. So their anxieties and their fears and their insecurities. And their fears come from a long stem of things. And their fears didn't only stem from worrying about my health, but I think there was a lot of navigating life as immigrants, learning to manage racism and prejudice, all of which has shifted a great deal from several decades ago. But it was super real and intense in different ways at that time. A lot of newness, a lot of adjustment, a lot of unknowns. And there were other fears like needing to be successful to sustain a life here and supporting extended family and having to feel that it is important not to create a scene, that enduring unfairness is the trade off for being in a safe country. And then I also think of something like that's not related to my parents, but just I guess I connect to this one theme of when there's too much concentration, it hides true emotion, disallowing me to feel freely and remain in the here and now. So, what I mean by this is these are the times where I'm like immersed in and focusing on that perfect outcome. And so, with full attention and concentration, I, I would be quite unaware of my own emotions during those moments. So, I might not even be paying attention to the actual feels or what it's like to be in that present moment.
I can't imagine what it would have been like to grow up carrying some of the fears and insecurities that your parents had to handle firsthand.
Mhm.
I'm wondering, can you share more about some of these additional layers that you've started to mention?
Yeah. Yeah. Now, with some of these additional layers, those are the pieces like I felt that really made it so much more intense. So there's like perfectionism and perfectionistic traits that people can identify with. But I did feel like all of these additional factors, these are the aspects that I had no idea could drive perfectionism to the lengths that it had gone to for myself. So if I tap into the deeper roots that cultivated the deep core of perfectionism, I think of things like cultural roots and fear. So, my parents, they always taught us to never make a scene. We need to make it in this country. We just have to keep working hard and keep your head down. If you're going to be recognized for anything, it will be your successes. Otherwise, you could be a target of some kind. And education is everything, and you need to thrive, and you must be smart, and you must remain focused, and you must earn good grades, and you must be a good girl. And you got to show us that you're a good girl. And even for grades, it can't be just any kind of grades. They had to be like spectacular, exceptional, out of this world grades. I remember in elementary school, I still remember this one time, this assignment I had worked on for like 2 weeks straight, and I worked really hard. And I put my heart and soul into it. And I ended up getting a 93% as my final grade. And I was so proud of myself because I had put in so much work and I felt like I was reaping the benefits. And I remember excitedly and eagerly waiting for my father to come home that night. And I did show him. And while he was proud, he did ask, where did the other 7% go? So even though it wouldn't have been my parents' intentions, it was moments like this that really added fuel and momentum for the perfection to thrive. So much fear, so much need to fix things, to be perfect, to do it right, to do it with a particular blueprint that I did not actually have. It was really stressful. And if we were to tap into family dynamics, I'm not sure how, but I somehow got this idea that my brothers know best. So even if I thought I was smart, they were smarter, and that they just know. And I frequently was told I better check it out with one of my brothers. And so there was such a disconnect in my parents' academics from back home and what I was being taught here in Canada that my parents many times got me to lean on my brothers. So that made me feel, or perhaps gave me the idea, that they will always know better. So I know less, they know more. So that was the thing. And then gender, because I'm a girl, I can't do this or I can't do that. Or I'd be told and reminded all the time, like so often, constantly, it's different for boys, it's different for them, it's different for girls. And I was raised as an only girl, not an only child, but an only girl. And from my mother's side of the family, like her extended family, all her siblings had boys. So I was the only girl. And so I learned very quickly that the rules for boys and girls were very different. And what was permissible for boys was not always the case for girls or for me. So, yet again, I would need to do it right, get it right, show up in a way that I could be accepted, be impressive, no mistakes to be made, this high need to impress. And I feel like all of this combined has been so deeply rooted that I'm programmed in such a way that every life decision and choice that I have made in life for a long time, and still probably I do from time to time, it's these choices that I make and my actions towards people all derived from the notion of I gotta do it perfectly.
I think you make some really great points. It sounds like you had many conflicting messages that you needed to learn to and adapt to quickly to try and navigate your life at a young age. And I think you raise a really great point about perfectionism and how some of these, like you said, these layers contribute to our perfectionism without us necessarily seeing a direct connection. So I think it's really great that you're exploring these topics for our listeners,
Hmm.
for them to be able to make these connections and parallels that things don't necessarily need a direct connection to be impactful.
Well, it's usually all in the subtleties, right? And then if you think about it, because this is what I learned and I was conditioned to sort of show up as, it was like a survival mode of some kind. So it doesn't necessarily mean it was the best for me, but it's the best that I knew how at the time. That's how I was able to adapt.
Get through what you needed to.
Hmm. It didn't always make sense to me, but I think, like I said, I really did try my best. But those are the things that manifested, right?
Yes.
Hmm.
So, can you tell me more about how you were affected? Having gone through the journey of dealing with the numerous life challenges that you've faced, and how the perfectionism kind of remained this driving force for you.
Hmm. Yeah. So this is probably a good place to talk about where perfectionism shows up because it hasn't always been blatant. And many times it has been super sneaky. And I didn't know that whatever I was dealing with, that perfectionism was the culprit behind it all. So, one thing I can share is that people don't, not all people know this, but I am a trained Indian classical Kathak dancer. And this has been a passion of mine right from being a little girl. And as I got older and started to perform, attend intense trainings and regular classes and extra practices, it definitely showed up in dance, the perfectionism. It started with inner dialogue to core beliefs I had about myself, to feeling that I needed to prove myself as a dancer, to hide the health symptoms that I experienced while dancing, sometimes making excuses for them, and to relentlessly practice at times where I felt I was practicing in my home around the clock so I could ensure that I was in, that I made it, that I made the cut. And whether it be like the teacher liking me or someone being able to give me praise during a practice run or being given a particular dancing part for any particular shows. So it really did show up in dancing. It also showed up in anything to do with academics. Even if there wasn't something I didn't understand, it would be very difficult for me to want to try. Not because I felt lazy, but because for me, I would feel like if I got it wrong, then that was it. And I must have allowed such an intense amount of anxiety to brew as a result of this mindset that unless I was confident in what I was doing, unless I knew exactly what needed to be executed, if I didn't have a plan to follow, this at times would spill over into procrastination.
I'm amazed at how deeply rooted perfectionistic traits can really be for some. And I would not have imagined this for you at all. Along with anything academics, was there any other sort of similar impacts?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, along with academics, it also showed up with exam prep and presentations, like that whole spiel. So, with exams, many times I actually didn't really perform well, but I excelled in every other aspect of the course or the class, like, whether it be presentations or assignments or papers, quizzes, maybe not quizzes, but I really did rock all of that stuff. But at what cost? How many all-nighters? How much extra time did I spend? How much time was I glued to my notebooks and computers and textbooks and all of that? And having to ensure that each and every aspect was completed to the T and then some. All the T's have to be crossed, all the I's have to be dotted. The exams is actually what would bring my average down. I have no idea what sort of inner dialogue I had with myself. I must have blocked so much of it out. But I'm pretty sure I just doomed myself, letting myself believe that it was just too scary. So, one thing we know as clinicians, Steph, is that when we feel things are too scary, that's like AKA danger, danger zone, dangerous, right?
Yes.
That if it was too scary, that means that I couldn't make it, that I didn't know it. I don't know stuff. I don't know things, right? They know better. People know better. I don't know. They know. So much pressure I had put on myself. It honestly felt like I would combust. And I would even have like a study plan in place each time and do every single practice question and textbook question and the whole works. But somehow the perfectionistic ways embedded within me somehow knew how to achieve its wins. So basically, when I think about it, perfectionism showed up with any task. But when I did really well with these tasks, as I often did, minus the exams, I was praised for my hard work, my attention to detail, my dedication and loyalty, and so much more. So all of the external validation is how I thrived. And it led me onto this belief that this is what I would need to keep doing in order to be seen, in order to be recognized. Such a faulty sense of self, yet that is where I was at. And then there was like this other noticing of what became my priorities, the need to do it perfectly. Like it always had to be perfect. No one could see my mess. I mean, like any kind of mess, like a physical mess or my emotional mess. Like if I had confusing thoughts, that was a mess. So my entire process, that outcome was the only focus. And I couldn't let anyone else in to my process or let them see what I thought was failure or failing. So there's times where I felt that I needed to ensure everyone else's needs were taken care of. So we're talking about family dynamics or people staying over at our home when I was a child or growing up, or whether there was like an event or a wedding or whatever it may be. I would literally throw myself in and I would just make sure everyone was being taken care of. And it became a distraction and an interference. I have a hunch that somewhere along the lines, I must have known that there was something disruptive about that process. I knew I would have to deprive something of myself to make space for another task at hand. I even remember one of my cousins was getting married and a whole bunch of family was staying over at our home. And I think of like how I might have come home from a part-time job or something. And then I was trying to clean things up and help people with meals and do different things and make sure people had what they needed to feel okay to go to sleep and all these things. So even just to take a shower ended up being so late in the night. Like I couldn't seem to do it while people were awake. So that's kind of what I mean, where I would kind of have to deprive myself of something just to make space for whatever I felt needed to be a task that I would have to execute. And so, even though in the back of my mind, I may have known that there was something disruptive about the process, I just couldn't seem to feel that there was any other way and that I just had to endure it. And I would tell myself, I have to keep working or being perfect because otherwise, there's something wrong with me. So, this is the narrative and dialogue that would run its course through my mind. I mean, I get it, Steph. It's definitely not an effective way of life. I know that now. I do know that now. But perfectionism becomes a way of life without it becoming known if you let it. And if you don't allow yourself to bring it into awareness, then you start to embody it and live it unknowingly, like I did, not knowing that it has the driver's seat in your life. And the whole time, you have no clue about it. Like I had no clue for such a long period of time. And when I did know perfectionism was around and I thought I had conquered it, I didn't realize how much more deeply rooted it was, right? But yeah, I still had this dialogue that, well, if I'm not allowed to make mistakes or show up imperfectly, then that goes for others too. They need to also show up perfectly. So it's these expectations I had of people. I set the bar high for others as well. There were times where my interactions with others would be based on those standards in mind. So without knowing, I could have even been judgmental in those moments. And another learning I have is that the perfectionism for me is the cause of procrastination. So if I can't do it perfectly, I can't do it at all. So such intense fear, fearing the risk of trying, being okay to just be present, knowing it could be better even if a mistake is made. So going back to procrastination, feeling that incapable to do a task at hand. For me, it created so much overwhelm. It created distraction, restlessness. Thoughts were going wild. I was so fixated on things not going to be okay. It literally took over all facets of my life physically, mentally, emotionally, and even socially.
Wow. So, this yo yo experience, of the dance between doing things perfectly and procrastination, they're so heavily linked. And as clinicians, you and I have a great awareness of this. But when I hear you talk about it, I can see for some people, they may not be always able to make that connection. So, for you, was there a certain point where you were able to draw this connection yourself? Or did it get masked somehow with all the other stuff?
Mm, yeah, for me, that's a really good question. Um, I think I was unaware that they were related. I think I was aware of the overwhelm, maybe, but unaware that what I was experiencing was actually a sense of overwhelm at the time. So, like, I could sense that I'm feeling a something, but I don't know what that something was or that I could name it just at
Mm.
that time. I just knew it was a not nice, not a feel good feel. And it's the thing I felt when I thought I didn't know how to do something. So it was like a reoccurring feeling, like, oh, that feeling, right? And I think its accompaniment of thoughts that would run through my mind were also really very tough, harsh, and debilitating. And it was constant. So it would only lead to a fear based response. I was conditioned for this. I knew it was a pattern. And many times I would try to prepare for it if I could anticipate stressors or stressful events on the rise. However, it seemed to get the best of me each time, even when I was preparing or prepared. And then, of course, there's the other times where, there are curveballs that happen and you're not equipped for those. But I can't even recall. This might require more reflection on my part, but I don't know when the flip switch happened. But when it did happen, what I can say is I was pausing more, catching myself more, asking myself, what is this thing that I'm feeling? What do I need? What's good for me in this moment that will help me? So I would be checking in with myself. I would be searching for facts. I would be getting open and curious about my process. There was this part of facing fears. I started to face my fears. And I now think about it. And I guess now when I think about it, I think I might have taken multi steps to face fears at various times. And this is why maybe I can't really pinpoint the turning point right now. I guess it must have gotten masked in with all of the muck, but I do know that it happened at some point and there were active steps I was able to take.
I think you raise a really great point that, I mean, we see it all the time in practice, just people coming to us saying, I feel not good, but I don't necessarily know why. I just know that I don't feel
Mhm.
good and I don't want to feel this way anymore.
Mhm.
So you
Mhm.
raise a really interesting point there. So Salima, something I'm curious about is something you have asked many of the guests on the show previously,
Mhm.
where you learn from the guests what part of the journey they are in.
Mhm.
So let's turn this over to you. In the depth of the journey that you're in now, where would you say you are? Getting started, in the middle, or looking back?
Mhm. You asked. Okay. I'm going to first say that I still see myself as a recovering perfectionist. And I want to really say that I'm looking back because of all the imperfection that I have embraced and for the marked progress I know that I have made and applaud myself for. However, the truth is, like I mentioned before about the layers that we peel back, I've peeled so many layers back that it has sort of allowed an opportunity for more things to surface. And for me, I have been fortunate enough to get into the nitty gritty of it. And I'm learning more and more that where I thought perfectionism was never housed for me, it certainly at least became a guest at times. It was visiting. And maybe it did plant some seeds and, hung out for a bit, but I'm going to at least say it was a guest. So I'm working through some of those pop ups and surprises and continue to take the journey inward as an experience to gain more insight and awareness about this process of mine and really connecting it, not just the theme of perfectionism, but those deeper roots of cultural aspects, family dynamics, expectations, external validation, the stories, the suggestions, all those little narratives, all of those pieces. And I'm also working diligently at unlearning what needs to be unlearned if they're still needing to be unlearned. But the super cool thing is, Steph, the super, super cool thing is that the more I recognize where perfection shows up, I am not shaming myself or even getting frustrated. I just name it as I recognize it, like, oh, that's that thing that's happening, right? It becomes a noticing. And then with a little more deliberate awareness practice and some gentle reminders for myself, I'm able to work through those moments too. So to answer the question, then, I am way closer to looking back, closer than I have ever been. It's so close. It's near. It feels like it's within reach. And that means I'm way past the middle and I have started to look back. But there's still some road ahead of me for me to be able to fully look back.
Yeah, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I've just seen from the wings the work that you've been doing and putting in. And like you said, these things are deeply rooted. And so it's going to take some time to kind of unlearn that. And this is a journey and it's an ever changing journey. And so I would agree. I think you've been doing so much work on yourself and really learning to unlearn some of these deeply seated patterns,
Hmm.
thought processes.
Yay,
Ooh.
it's true. Celebrations.
Absolutely. So you have walked us through the details of how certain
Hmm.
themes and events and experiences in your life have contributed to this underlying perfectionism. So,
Hmm.
how did all of this impact your mental health? How did it show up specifically?
Okay. Well, for me, I think this was like the gradual development of all of the themes and the accumulation over time. That is really how it took its hook into me and how it took its toll on me and had me having these thoughts of if I could just fix this or if I could just be that or if I could just basically all phrases that started this way with if I could just and end with something like that I could control better. So fixing or controlling mode, which is very much an extension of feeling that I'm wrong. I can't be right. I'm not enough. I am less worthy. And it's like I feel less worthy even when I know I'm worthy in comparison to others. Well, that was an old story, but certainly that's the gradual development. And if only this wasn't part of my story or makeup, and it goes on and on. So there's a whole running rant that goes on with this, right? And what I feel ready to share, um, Stephanie, is that there were some life events that I experienced that exacerbated some of what I have shared in terms of impact. Are you ready to hear that?
Hey, as long as you're willing to share, I am here to witness this part of your journey.
Okay, I'm going to go for it.
All right, go for it.
So I have gone through those yo-yos, right? Where I've endured a negative life event and circumstance or turmoil, and we haven't begun to even make a list of what those things are. But let's talk about something specific. So now there was a point in my life where I was putting myself through my master's level education and continuing to work in the field simultaneously. At that time, I was physically attacked by a client at work. And I'm not going to share other details about it as I would like to maintain some integrity for all people involved, both the organization and the perpetrator. However, not only at the time did I sustain severe physical injuries and impact to my vision, which thankfully was temporary, though I did not know that at the time, and a slew of things that had its like domino effect on me, I was emotionally and mentally traumatized. And this came out of nowhere for me. This is a place of work where I thrived. I was comfortable in the most high risk of scenarios. I was able to effectively manage any kind of instance. I enjoyed the work I did. I was enrolled in the master's program so I could continue to pursue the field in the way I wished. All aspects of my entire life really were intact. I was living my best life, fully in my element. Like my relationships with my friends and my people and my parents and my family, everything was intact. But the impact I'm sharing is not even from those particular outcomes. The deeper impact was I thought I had done something wrong and I deserved this. I'm still grappling with the idea of if I really thought I deserved it, but maybe I had this thought of like, I did something wrong, so I had it coming, that I could have or should have done something differently, when I was told time and time again that I just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So it was during this time that I lost my sense of purpose. I was a dancer. I couldn't dance, couldn't handle light of any kind. So I stayed in the dark a lot. I felt that things that I could do at once, I could not do any longer. And I was uncertain if I would ever be able to do them again. I felt like I had nothing to offer the world. I was embarrassed that this whole scenario had even happened to me. I felt like the ugliest person. It took a toll on how I felt about myself, appearance wise. I felt like no one was going to want to be around me anymore because of all those deficits. And I had worked so hard my entire life, health challenges, which by then I had managed well and was no longer in the limelight of my life. So to have all these things all intact, and then I felt like it was a slap in the face, that there wasn't going to be any hiding of these things anymore, that there was this deep sense of failure and shame because there was physical injury, right? This is not something I could hide. It was clear that something was not right. And I also felt that very few people understood the physical pain and limitations I had at the time. My mood fluctuated a great deal during that period. I was irritable and I just felt so misunderstood. And so, going back to what I said about not having purpose, I really could not find new meaning for the event that I experienced and the turmoil that I was facing. I also felt like I had failed at being that miracle baby, and I could now never amount to becoming anything, not even remotely close to being special. I felt I would never be seen, and I felt the deepest sense of emotional paralysis. I felt I had nothing. And the worst is that I somehow thought I did it to myself.
I could not imagine going. I mean, you were on such a high. You had things,
Hmm.
everything was going right. Everything was, falling into place.
Hmm.
And then you went to such a low that
Yeah,
it must have been emotionally, physically, mentally, just draining. And
it
and
was.
now you're trying to heal and you've got all of these lingering questions about what you could have done differently.
Yeah.
It must have been a very intense time on top of you're still in school. You're still trying to get your master's degree. You still
Mm-hmm.
have all of these other things. Life is lifing.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't imagine the intensity of that time period.
You know what? Another thing about intensity when you bring this up, it reminds me of like, so when I was taken to the hospital, basically the on-call supervisors or whoever would have to deal with any crisis, right, at work. It's almost like I was told by these individuals that I shouldn't press charges because you know how hard it is for the clients. And when the police came to take my statement, even I was in and out of so much pain. It was so horrible. I was holding my head together. It was just so horrifying. And they're basically telling me to understand how I would be making it so much worse for this individual if I press charges. So I'm getting it from the organization, I'm getting it from the police. And of course, because I felt I wasn't worthy enough, then I felt like, oh, yeah, I have to devote myself here again. Right. So
Right.
and I have to do it so that I can get maybe they'll see me as a good person then.
hmm And the helping profession that we're in,
Right.
right?
I'm supposed to. I'm supposed to be a good person. I'm supposed to help. I'm supposed to sacrifice. I'm supposed to. All these supposed tos.
Put your clients first.
Right.
And you've got people in power, you've got people in uniform, you've got doctors, you've got all these people telling you,
Hmm.
think about the other person.
Yeah.
Um,
I didn't feel like anyone had my back.
that I'm so sorry that happened. That must have been just a very intensive time.
It was. And I just want to say I'm really okay sharing about these things now because I've done a lot of work on it and not triggered at this point, but it does still pain me when I obviously think about those pain points. And I just want to say that, yes, it was a big undertaking to share in the extent that I just did. And I am proud of myself for doing it publicly.
You should be.
And yeah, and I hope that this act of courage of mine really does empower others to connect to the crux and core of what their untold stories are about. And better yet, come forward and share their story and allow themselves to be witnessed also. And while I shared all this uncertainty, shame, embarrassment, pain that I experienced, bit by bit, I did face my fears. I don't know how, but with the right external supports, I was able to somehow stay in school, complete that master's degree, and all the requirements. I did all the physical rehab I could. I even hit a health plateau for a long time, but I was determined to stay in the game. And there was something ignited within me that told me that I needed to ensure that I completed my education and pursue my career and to take my identity back. During this time, there wasn't a day that went by that wasn't a struggle for me. There were times I was unsure if I could make it through a day, even. I even had to travel across the globe for some treatments and procedures at one time. But I found a way to heal. I guess I dared myself to heal. I took the risk. I took the plunge. I trusted myself. And I didn't do it for anyone other than myself. That's right.
And that's amazing. You
Hmm.
did it for you.
Hmm.
And you put yourself first for once, it seems. And now you're getting to look back on that time and say, like, the good things and even some of the challenges maybe that have come out since then,
Hmm. Hmm.
have all been made possible because of the work you did on yourself.
Thank you.
So, Salima, what is your key message to the listeners of our show?
All right, I have so many messages. Okay, let's go through it. Okay, first of all, if you identify as a perfectionist or its traits, then own it and work through the process of letting yourself into the discomfort bit by bit. Get in touch with what drives your perfectionistic tendencies, whether it's old stories that you have gotten accustomed to, or whether it stems from your cultural roots or deeply embedded patterns adopted from your family, social roles, whatever it may be. Accept what it is and accept it quickly so that you can work through it. Get in touch with the who, the what, the whens, and wheres of how perfectionism thrives in your world. And remember, you can unlearn behaviors. Perfectionism gets conditioned over time. And the truth is that you can keep your power and stay in the driver's seat so you can give yourself the best chance to feel and remain empowered. And I continue to say, embrace being perfectly imperfect. Start telling yourself that you love all parts of yourself, even the imperfections. The imperfections are what makes you uniquely you. So breathe that in and keep working on healing and bettering yourself. Work those mental and emotional muscles. They need maintenance. It's going to take time, and yet you're just going to keep attending to it. And I know I've said it before, challenge yourself, get outside your comfort zone, allow yourself to get comfortably uncomfortable with change, healing, challenges, and self acceptance and self forgiveness. And do not take on or be influenced by the emotions of others. Only own what's yours. People around you may experience certain undesirable emotions, and you don't need to get sucked in. And if you recognize that you have, give back what's not yours and only focus on your own experiences and emotions. And lastly, remember, perfectionism is not a thing to strive for. It is toxic, it is unhealthy, it is unreasonable, and definitely not a way of life. Embrace your authentic self. That's what I've got.
Those are great. We'll take them all to heart. Let's let people know, give them a reminder of how they can connect with Dare to Heal.
Okay, well, if anyone's looking for therapy, just visit daretoheal.co. If you want to learn more about how to unlearn fear and become the best version of you, then you want to visit nametamecontrol.com and enroll for an amazing digital program that is run both as a self-paced course, and there are some live offerings at times. And its creation really was inspired by the events I just shared about in terms of what I went through post-attack in the workplace. And if people want to learn more about the podcast, of course, please visit daretoshare.co, daretoshare.co. And if you want to follow us, we are findable as at Dare to Heal for Facebook and LinkedIn, and at Dare to Heal Co for Instagram and Twitter. And we are also findable on YouTube. We are very small there, baby steps. But if you'd like to help us grow, please subscribe.
Look at you flourishing as a butterfly with all your healing, transformation, and bravery. This sharing had so many components, and you shared the complexities with ease. Salima, you just dared yourself to share. Congratulations!
Congratulations to me. I did it.
You did it.
So this is what guests feel like when we get to this point in the interview.
Now you know how they feel. Again, the second time.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you for your kind words. Thank you so much, Steph. It definitely was intense at some points as I unraveled. However, the delayering and the sharing is vital in this process. And I really appreciate the time you took and the grace you gave me to be in this space as the interviewee.
Not a problem. Thank you so much for allowing me to be the interviewer. And do you have any final words of wisdom, or anything else you want to make sure the audience hears from you?
Yeah, I do actually. In my quest to keep this podcast going and to bring forward the concept of mental beauty, just as I closed with this quote from the first episode, I want to just remind our audience of the same message. So this quote is from Maya Angelou, and the quote says, "There is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you." Again, there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story inside of you. So I really just want to let that sink in for listeners. So if you've got your untold story and you're ready to let it unfold, come on the show and let us hear it. Let's witness it. Let's journey together. So Stephanie, as we close, I can't thank you enough for coming on as the interviewer for today's episode on the Dare to Share Your Untold Story podcast. Not only did I dive in deeper, this could not have been the case without your guidance and support. I have so much gratitude for your presence, and thank you for being part of the bigger picture and a helping hand in breaking down the barriers of mental stigma.
Thank you for having me.
To all of our listeners, If you like what you've been hearing on this podcast and you want to be part of breaking down barriers of mental stigma, I invite you to go wherever you are listening to the episode and hit subscribe. Leave us a comment or a review of the episode and maybe how you relate to it. To learn more about what we offer, visit www.daretoheal.co. And if you are feeling ready and brave to share, please submit your story by visiting www.daretoshare.co. Thanks for joining in.